Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Gail Babitt. Gail is the CEO of Cedar Electronics, where she also sits on the board of directors. Prior to her promotion to CEO, Gail was the Chief Operating Officer. Cedar Electronics is the home of Escort Radar and Cobra. Gail?
Maggie, thank you, and welcome everyone. So today we're going to talk about supply chain, tariff, pandemic, what's next. So let me walk you through the agenda. So, we're going to start with an introduction. I'll introduce myself a little bit, tell a little bit about Cedar Electronics. Then we'll talk about normal times, meaning 2018. Then tariffs, which was essentially in 2019, going to pandemic, welcome to 2020, and what's next. And when we talk about all these subjects, we'll talk about what we've done to combat all of these things. After we run through all of these topics, we'll open up for Q&A that we'll be using the chat. And then after that, there'll be a happy hour. So let's kick this off. Introduction. So yes, I'm Gail Babitt, CEO of Cedar Electronics. So I joined Cedar Electronics in 2018 in April as the Chief Financial and Operating Officer. So my background is really as a CFO. Spent 20 years in the C-suite, working in turnarounds to help companies improve. We all face companies that have challenges. How do we make them better? How do we drive more profitability? So Cedar Electronics, just to level set for a second. So Cedar went through a lot of changes, a lot of management changes, and a lot of ownership changes. And so what happened is along the way, some of the blocking and tackling gets mixed. So some of the key things, the fundamentals, got skipped over as we were driving initiatives. So what were the things that were not being done? Well, we got over skewed. We had so many different products in each product family. We got over inventoried. We didn't have some of the selling discipline, and just some of the real innovation was not where it could be. So who is Cedar Electronics? We're about driving products and information technology to help consumers drive smarter and safer. What I'm doing right now are some of our products. So you see on the right-hand side, those are Escort Radar products. In the top right-hand corner, that's our newest product. That's our Redline 360C. That's what we refer to as our Halo product. That is what's our newest and greatest. It literally came out 3 weeks ago. On the left-hand side, those are two of the Cobra products. The top is a dash camera, and the bottom is our CB radio. We've been making CB radios for over 50 years. It's pretty amazing, still doing it. They are really important to truckers and fleet drivers. So for Cedar Electronics, we're trying to make people on the road be safer. So now let's talk about normal times. Now I already got into a little bit of the level setting, what we were encountering, what we inherited. And the first focus was how do we get the company to be more profitable? With that being said, we had some issues. So here is essentially 2018. We'll start with the fact that all of our products are single sourced. And as all of us know in finance community, the last thing we like is risk. And when you think about all of your suppliers being single sourced, it got really scary. So we knew it was something we needed to tackle. Now you can compound that with all of our suppliers and all of our single source products are all from Asia. So everything is made in China or the Philippines. I say everything is in China and the Philippines. Radar detectors are the Philippines, and everything else is coming from China. So when you have the supply chain in Asia, what does that do for consumer electronics? It means that our lead times are 4 to 6 months for our products. Might not sound so bad for some people, but that means that you have to be really good at forecasting. And how does that work with innovation and new product development? Creates a lot of challenges. And so even when you want to change that and reduce the lead times, you can. you can cut off a little over a month by using air freight. It gets really expensive. And if you think that's normally expensive in essentially 2018, in 2020, it's worse. It's worse. We're paying about 5 times as much to air freight products today. So that was 2018. That was our level. So how we say, okay, this is the business. We're turning the business around. We're driving profitability. We're dealing with supply chain and what we can do for the future. And in 2019, we all of a sudden get faced with tariffs. So all of Cedar's products that are made in China, that means CB radios, marine radios, jump starters, power inverters, dash cameras, they're all made in China. They all get subject to tariffs. Now, depending on what category you're in, the tariff can be 7.5% or 25%. So Section 301, which added the increased tariffs, there was a list 1, a list 2, a list 3, a list 4A, and a list 4B. And that was essentially what we had to keep evaluating, are our products subject to tariffs. So in list 1, we had products that were subject. And that was a 25% tariff, and that hit our CB radios and our marine radios. List 2, we didn't have any products that were subject to it. In list 3, that hit our dash cameras and our power inverters. That also was a 25% tariff. In list 4A, it hit our jump starters and radar detectors if we made them in China, and that was 7.5%. List 4B, we didn't have any, and of course that one went away. So obviously we needed to find a solution. So what's the first thing we did? So we evaluated based on all of our HTS codes, how do we file for exemptions? This was important, but what a lot of people don't know is the exemptions are not blanket exemptions. They're not for forever. You got a 1-year exemption on what you filed for. So that was great. We did get some great exemptions, but you still had to wonder what happens next? What happens a year later? So we also started to negotiate with our suppliers and ask them to chip in some money, help us pay some of the costs that we were going to have to encounter for tariffs. Now, what a lot of people realize is the exchange rates between Chinese currency and US dollars were being managed a little bit. And that helped the supplier have what I'll call a windfall. So they were able to chip in some money to help absorb some of the impact of tariffs. But it wasn't all of it. Wasn't even half of it. So we had to go a step further. So you also had to say, okay, how do I help drive the company, maintain profitability, and still make sure I have the right supply of products for customers? And so we did have to increase some selling prices to customers and essentially to consumers. And the last thing, and this is a longer term answer, had to evaluate how do we solve for the long term the supply chain for North America, for specifically US sales. So just so everyone knows, this was a process. It took time. But based on the steps that we took, we were able to offset over 85% of the burden from the tariffs between the exemptions, the money that was chipped in from our suppliers, and from price increases. The balance of it we absorbed. And again, you have to be careful because not all of your competitors are going to be subject to tariffs, which means you can't just increase prices beyond what competitive prices are, because then you price yourself out of the market. So we had to balance that. So as we solved, again, over 85% of the burden for tariffs, we now hit 2020. and we have a pandemic. So what was the impact of the pandemic? There were significant slowdowns in manufacturing. It started in China, which again, I said that's where most of our supply chain is, but it also went to the Philippines. And to be candid, our supply chain in China, at least from a manufacturing perspective, is back up and running, more close to normal. The Philippines impact is much greater, and they've been impacted already for 3 months. So the manufacturing has been slowed down for the 3-month period, and it's still not back to where it needs to be. So this impact is great for us, and we had to supply some way to solve it. How do you solve it when your supply chain is down and you've single sourced your products? Our team really came together and they said, how do we solve it? And we got sub-assemblies from North America into our manufacturing facility, and we started to in-source assembly. So we are making products again here in our own facilities to be able to help satisfy demand. At the same time, we're also looking at a partner that we found who's going to help us long-term with a lot of our product categories here in North America. So what does that do? It will alleviate single sourcing, it will alleviate lead times, and it will diversify our risk. So how did we make it through it to begin with? All right, so we started 2020, no one knew the pandemic was going to happen, but we were a little lucky. And when I say we were a little lucky, so we stocked up our inventory. We stocked up for 2 reasons. One is we didn't know if we would have an extension on our exemptions for tariffs. And number 2, we always increase our inventory levels going into the new year. And we do that because we want to make sure when they have the slowdown for the Chinese New Year that we don't have an impact in our supply chain. So we've increased our inventory levels that helped us buy some time to get solutions. Again, as I said, we in-sourced our assembly. That sounds simple, really wasn't. Because we have some production capabilities, we've been manufacturing products for years, we started to set up assembly in our Westchester, Ohio facility to be able to make our radar products. We're going to continue to expand that and expand our capabilities. We also have a relationship with a new supplier to continue to help us along the way. And most importantly, we've continued to launch new products. I talked at the beginning about our new Redline 360C. That's our radar product that we just launched this past month. We've got another product that's being launched next month. Then we have 2 more the month after that. So as we continue to innovate, we can drive change, and we have to do that while we mitigate the risk of our single source suppliers and dependence, frankly, on Asia because of what it does to impact us for the long term. So the question really for everyone is, what's next? What do we see happening? How do we see it impacting us? How do we see it impacting other companies? So to be candid for everyone, 2020 is going to be a tough year. Financially, a lot of people are looking at what the budgets we put together at the end of 2019 and what we thought we were going to accomplish for 2020. We just know that's not realistic. Second fact is there are some companies that probably won't survive. This is going to be a true test. And for some of them, has nothing to do with what they've done. It's the challenges of the market at large. I will tell you, I think that we're going to come out of this as a leaner company, not just us, but a lot of companies. We've learned how to work together better remotely. We've learned to use our tools, like what we're using today with Zoom. At my company, we use Microsoft Teams. We're finding ways to get things done in a very different way. And we're finding with reductions that we've had to make that we can get by and still be really productive, in some regards more productive. And last, I believe that our company, probably many of your companies, are going to end up stronger and better for the long term from what we learned through this pandemic. We're going to learn how to survive. We're going to learn how to be more profitable. We're going to learn how to do things differently.
Thank you, Gail, for that very insightful presentation. We do currently have one question.
Okay.
And what the question is, what is the current status right now of the tariffs with your company, and how are you responding to them? I imagine there's still quite a bit of uncertainty.
Yeah, it's actually a great question. So when you want to talk about tariffs, and I can go category by category. So for our CB radios, the HTS code that they're under are actually subject to tariffs, and we have an exemption for them. So we got that renewed for this year. So it's running through another year. For our marine radios, the fixed amount are subject to the tariffs, and we're absorbing the cost for that. For the handhelds, we got an exemption, and we're waiting to see if that will be extended. For the dash cameras, we actually were in a different HTS code with a change in our product that we did, which enabled us to not have the tariff. So it's a combination. We're doing a lot of things, evaluating if we can change some things in our products to essentially put them in a different category that would have an exemption, and we're filing for exemption. But it's still tough, and it's a challenge, and we have to solve for it, and some of it is moving some production out of China.
Yeah, I think one of our attendees also wanted to know, did you pass some of those tariff-related costs out to your clients, and maybe how much of that were you able to pass along?
Yeah, it was a minimal amount. So we didn't increase our customer pricing. I think the maximum we increased was 4%. So we did not pass along a lot of the cost, and it's because we have competitors in the same market that do not manufacture in China. So you have to think about what that does for a consumer in determining to buy your product or buy someone else's if your product is priced too high.
Yeah, I can see where you have to balance the competitive edge with also wanting to offset those higher production costs. We have a couple of questions here, and they're relating to the team, to your staff. So, how are they impacted, first of all, during all this uncertainty? First, you shared with us how you had to hurry up and figure out what are we going to do to have alternative sourcing because the tariffs came into play. And now we have the pandemic and we have these serious health concerns. So talk to us if maybe two parts to this question. One is, how are the employees being impacted by all of this? And then how are you addressing concerns around social distancing, COVID-19, the health concerns in the manufacturing setting?
Yeah, great question. So most of our employees, everyone that can, is working remote. And that's been since March 16th. And just so everyone knows, we have offices in Ohio, in Chicago, in Mississauga, Canada, in Manchester, England, and in Hong Kong. So we've had everyone working remote. It started in Hong Kong. So we had to make changes. We had to quickly go out and buy laptops for our employees that didn't have laptops. We had to set up new partners. So I talked about Microsoft Teams. We had to institute Microsoft Teams for the entire company. We had to create a new customer service software. So we implemented Freshdesk. so that our customer service group could all work from home. So there were a lot of things we had to do very quickly, and we got as many employees that can work remote as possible working remote. We did have to do a RIF, a reduction in force, as a lot of companies did. And then we had other employees that we furloughed. And so from the furlough, we slowly started to bring some people back. And the only thing we kept going throughout the entire March until now, and I use March because for the US that was the time frame, was we kept operations in Chicago, which takes all of our distribution, so they receive our products and send them to our customers. We kept that operating with social distancing in mind. So, you know, I am definitely one of those people that err on the side of being conservative in how we approach this. We made sure in March, actually it was before March, that we received masks for all of our employees in the warehouse that would be there. So we have masks, we have gloves. We set things up to ensure social distancing, changed how our restrooms worked and how people interacted, even how many people are in any space at a time, how our lunch rooms worked, ensure that people are washing their hands, stuff that I think now we all take for granted. We spent a lot of time deploying those methodologies, and we take people's temperature when they start at the day, enforce that people are wearing masks. We have masks and gloves for any delivery drivers. We ensure where they're able to stand. So we did a lot of things early on to make sure we kept our teammates safe. And that becomes a big part of the supply chain and our distribution and our methodologies. For us, the other thing that's changed in kind of how you do business is we have a lot more. So I always had quarterly town halls where the whole company would get together and we would talk about how business is. We are having them much more frequently. So every 3 or 4 weeks, we're having, you know, get-togethers to talk about how things are going in the company, to make sure that people hear a little bit about how things are progressing, because they're feeling a little out of touch. You know, even though we're working well from home, it's things we take for granted. I'm one of those people, my style is I do management by walk around. Can't do that. So
by Zoom,
how do you do that?
Huh?
How do you, yeah. And, you know, we have we were having a weekly happy hour where, you know, on Friday evenings, everyone could get together and just talk. So doing everything possible so that we continue to feel connected, continue to stay informed, and continue to tell people to be safe.
Yeah, that makes and you know, to your point, we have learned quite a bit the importance of communication, frequent communication, and even that transparency to share with our teams what we do know and what we don't know, and what we're doing to try to get some answers. So, you know, shifting the frequency is something that, you know, would certainly be quite helpful. You know, some of the questions here are shifting back to the supply chain. Did you do a lot of retooling or retrofitting of your assembly lines or your production to accommodate for the social distancing? And do you anticipate that you will just keep that in place, or are you anticipating that whenever next normal is, and we don't know when that'll be, but did you anticipate that you might go back to the original layouts?
Those are great questions. So we did do a lot of retrofitting. We made sure that when our assembly when people are there in production, that they're at a safe distance from each other. And so we move things around. We've made some investments in our infrastructure. And this is not going to just be for the pandemic. It's about keeping our employees safe. And I think this has been a wake-up call for a lot of us with a lot of things. But, you know, we've made this investment and we want to make sure the most, you know, I look at it as twofold. One is I have to make sure the company is successful and profitable, but I can't do that at the expense of not making sure our teammates are safe and healthy. That's the most important thing. And so, you know, we've made a lot of investments to retrofit things and to ensure that they have the right space and they feel safe. And we've also let our employees know that if they're not comfortable, as people were coming back from furloughs, we said, if you're not comfortable coming back yet, and some people have different reasons to not be comfortable. We have some employees that said, hey, I've got, you know, children I have to take care of, or grandchildren I have to take care of, or a sick family member. And we don't want to force a hardship on any of our employees. So it's a very different balance than the way businesses will normally operate.
And that's probably a new normal, right? Going forward,
Yeah.
that we figured out that distancing is probably better and healthier long term. You know, you mentioned before, as a result of the tariffs, but clearly also from the pandemic, shifting some of your capabilities here stateside and to North America. Do you anticipate that will be a long-term shift, or are you exploring either going back to China or other Asian countries?
Yeah, I expect it to be long-term. So it solves several things. So by us bringing more assembly and manufacturing to North America as well, it also enables our ability to reduce our lead times. There's also things we're doing in our processes for how we design products to make it easier for us to manufacture, I'll call finally, and alternate products. All of those things are going to help us for the long term. And bringing this back, I think, just makes us more nimble, which at the end of the day, when you think about supply chain, the ability to mitigate how much inventory you have on hand, increase inventory turns, helps increase profitability.
Right. I want to ask you what I think is a phenomenal question. We don't typically see a lot of women in executive roles in manufacturing organizations. So tell us a little bit about what you're seeing. Is it better now than it was when you first started in the field? And what do you see for the, you know, in the future?
Yeah, and I'm going to go a little tangential on this question because, you know, and I'm hoping this is relevant for a lot of people on the team, because, you know, a lot of people would ask, I've spent 20 years in the C-suite, it's really been as a CFO. What helped me make the move to CEO and what drove that? And, you know, it's kind of a note for other people. And, you know, I didn't ever have that thought of saying, hey, you know, I want to be the CEO of the company. I joined the company to help the company improve results. But I had a relationship with the owners of the company. So with essentially the board and the ownership, they'd worked with me in the past. So I spent several years, in the last 20 years, several of them, I had 4 engagements with one private equity group. The last one was not just a turnaround, it was a turnaround and exit. And some of the lenders that were in that group are the owners of the company that I'm at now, Cedar. So I brought with me, because they already knew me, some credibility. They understood how I work, and they are very financially driven. And so when you think about all of your companies and the boards of your companies, when you have a lot of people on your board and the ultimate kind of owners and decisions that have financial acumen, there's an easier rapport and an easier relationship. So as soon as I joined the company and I did a deep dive, and I'm a data junkie, so I did a lot of analysis to understand the business, the challenges and the opportunities of the business. And as I did that, and I was able to lay that out for our board, they really understood what my plan was and how I was going to help the company improve and get better and what the future looked like, which made it very natural for them to ask me to be the CEO. And so part of it is to ensure that, for me, it was ensure you set yourself up to be successful. Because if my board consisted of, to be candid, people that had more of a sales and technology acumen, I might not have been the right fit. We might not have had the same relationship and rapport and respect as we did for someone who spoke the same language as I did. And so I say that to say, listen, I'd love to believe that it's different and it's changing and, you know, we're breaking the glass ceiling, but it's slow. You know, it's still not, frankly, where I think it needs to be and where it should be. And I'm hoping that we get more changes. I think boards are starting to realize people with a financial acumen really bring something great into the CEO slot. We don't only look at numbers and profitability. We look at a lot of risk management, and we look at every aspect of a business because we do analysis that drives into everything for every industry. You know, my background is not consumer electronics, so I'd never worked in consumer electronics till I got to Cedar. You just have to learn things along the way.
Thank you. Very insightful. And, you know, understanding that CFO role has changed and evolved so much over the years that it's really a more holistic role of fully understanding the organization, and a lot more CFOs now have the operating expertise, which is, you also have both dual roles, which then provides a robust background for a fit into the CEO role. Thank you for sharing your personal experience with that. You know, as we're thinking, some organizations have experienced some positive demand, some, you know, benefit and demand as a result of the pandemic, and some have not. But share with us, how has the pandemic specifically impacted the demand for your products?
It's a great question. So I as along with everyone that's participating in this webinar, you know, as the pandemic started hitting, you know, phase one was, okay, what do we do to right size the organization for the impact we're going to see? And phase two is, let's quantify what we expect to see. So we took what the budget was for 2019 and then put a new, I'll call it, forecast out for what we expected to see. And it was a little scary, and that really drove some of the reductions we had to make and some of the decisions of how we furloughed employees and how we bring things back. And so in April, it was pretty bad. So, you know, March wasn't bad, but April, to be candid, we were less than 50% of budget. So we, and that is what we forecasted. So we were really scared. I have to tell you, we thought that it would recover a little bit in May. So, you know, we were forecasting a little over 50%, recovered better than that. So we found that, you know, April wasn't as bad as we thought. May recovered faster than we thought. In June, which we refer to P6, we're essentially close to budget. So we are outperforming what we forecasted, but I still I'm cautious because, you know, I see, you know, I'm one of those, I'll be very candid, I'm one of those real nerds. I have 23 states that I track every day for how COVID is impacting and look at cumulative growth rates. Like every good finance person, I turned it down to data. And so, you know, the trends that I've been watching for the past week in some of the states and the growth rates, you know, whether it's Texas or California or Florida or Arizona, North Carolina, South Carolina. I mean, that scares me because, if we start to see them hitting like New York did, and it translating not just into cases, but into hospitalizations, and then mortality rates continue to go up, that will have an impact on the economy. So that's going to impact our results. So my board says the same thing. They try to push me. Oh, you expect it to be better? I can't. I'm still cautious because I don't know what I don't know, and a pandemic is so new for me.
Right. And I'm with you on monitoring some of those increased cases and continuously coming to grips with the fact that we never got past the first wave. And in a lot of places, maybe we never even got to the peak. So, we've heard a lot of theories as to whether we're going to have a U-shaped recovery, a V-shaped recovery, which I think is not really feasible. And an economist I heard today said it's more like the square root sign, just backwards. It's going to come up a little bit, and then it's just going to going to be a flat plateau for a while. Seems likely that way.
Yeah.
And so, speaking of having your suppliers be more based out of North America, and perhaps this impacts you or not, but prior to COVID, we had experienced and had many predictions of the high shortage of skilled manufacturing labor in the U.S. and how that was going to get to a crisis mode, 5 to 10 years from now. Has COVID allayed some of those concerns now, or does that still remain a valid human capital concern?
Yeah, so my perspective on this is, we have to be realistic for manufacturing to remain competitive in the U.S. It means that the labor rates of what we pay for manufacturing have to be more competitive, and we have to have more automation. And so it's going to be a challenge for a lot to come to the U.S., which is why, again, so what I said is we're doing assembly, we're doing sub-assemblies out of Mexico, some out of North America, but it's highly automated. So it's surface mount technology. So it's investing in machines, not as much in labor. For labor intensive, it's going to be hard in the U.S. And there's a dependency, and I'll keep some of kind of the OEMs out of this. There's a dependency for immigration. So, a lot of the things that we're doing to try to bring manufacturing back, but stifling immigration actually contradicts itself and makes it very hard. So I think it's going to be a challenge, and I think a lot of us, myself included, are, the difference between what happens in November will dramatically impact what we think will happen with tariffs, what we think will happen with immigration, and how we think all of that impacts manufacturing.
So let me ask you for a second, because our audience is mostly finance leaders and a lot of CFOs. If you flip your CFO cap back on, how do you plan or even begin to create a roadmap with, you just mentioned at least 4 different uncertainties that we may or may not get resolved coming up in November. So what is your approach to managing and leading, managing your business, but leading your organization with so much uncertainty?
Yeah, and so to be candid, if we just had one thing, it would have been easier. But with the back-to-back tariff pandemic, what we're doing now is the same thing. Even if I knew the answer for November, it's the same thing I would be doing, which is you always have to mitigate risk. So dual sourcing, if all your sales are in the U.S., if you could have a way that you have some stable amounts, so consistent amounts that you had being produced overseas if you had slightly better pricing and then have more of a fluctuating amount to meet demand that's coming from North America. That's how I would continue to do things. You've got to, as a CFO, you always manage for what's going to have an impact that can really hurt your company. And so it's a balance. You always have to balance between risk and taking advantage of opportunity. That's our job. And I will tell you, it's the same job as a CEO. So we've got to say, how do I make sure that I mitigate the risk and put myself in a position to really engage in the upside? So it's going to be bringing more stuff to North America.
Keeping with a little bit of this CFO related topics, many organizations right now are coming to grips with pretty significant asset impairment decisions and conversations resulting from the pandemic mainly. But, for some companies, it could be pretty significant. Have you, are you seeing the same thing for Cedar Electronics, where you're having to perhaps take some charges for asset impairment?
Yeah, it's a great question. So fortunately for us, we don't have any issues with asset impairment, especially because we don't have manufacturing. What we'd be doing is assembly, so it's not like you have huge investments in equipment that now your volumes are so much lower. But I can definitely see that as a challenge. And so my advice would be is to, for a second, take it away from GAAP measures and think about it from a business perspective. So is it a temporary impairment, or is it something that's going to be longer lasting? Is there a recovery? So, you have to make sure you really evaluate what's happening in the today or what's happening long term, and then how is the solution for it?
Yeah. And also speaking of long term and sustainability, many during the but sustained growth that we had experienced, many organizations became, quite extended and, incurred quite a bit of debt to fuel their growth. There was so much optimism in the economy even 12 months ago. And so, some manufacturing organizations are finding themselves struggling with, the debt burden, thinking through restructuring debt or seeking for alternative sources for capital or liquidity. What is your experience at Cedar in these areas?
Yeah, great questions. So we actually just refinanced our debt, so it's a timely question. And to be honest, we refinanced our debt was coming due at the end of this month, but we had started in January refinancing even before we knew about the pandemic. And it's because we're in a different financial condition now than we were when we got this debt. As I said, it was a turnaround. We thankfully over the last 2 years had a great recovery. We also put together a very aggressive plan for, how we were going to tackle the pandemic and what our forecast looked like and how we were going to manage. Our ownership has been incredible in partnering with us to help alleviate any concerns. And so with the partnership of a good owner group that said, hey, we're here if you need us, thankfully we didn't. So we didn't get to the point where we increased any debt. All we did was go to banks. And I will tell you, and I don't know anyone else that's out in the market right now, it's more expensive. Debt is more expensive today than it was 6 months ago. And that's because of the uncertainty and everything that's happened in the marketplace. So although you look and you see, prime rates down and LIBOR rates down, it doesn't translate to our borrowing rate, which is frustrating. See, that was my CFO hat. That was frustrating.
Exactly. Right. A lot of lenders are requiring an interest rate floor and minimum guarantees.
Yes. And so that's going to be normal now. You're going to have to accept. So I think when I looked at the 30-day LIBOR rate, it was, less than, 25 basis points, but you're going to have a floor, so you can expect 75 or 100 basis points as a floor. They're going to make higher margins. There are some banks that are sitting on the sidelines, so it's harder to find a partner to refinance with, but there is money out there. There are alternatives. And so one of my philosophies has always been, even if you don't need all the capital, when you can refinance and when you can get a source of debt so that it's there just in case for your rainy day fund, you do it. Cash ends up being king. And if you don't have the access when things get tough, that's when it's too late. So this is, even though it's a tough time, it's the right time. I wouldn't, if your debt comes due in the next 3, 6, 9 months, I would start talking now. It will take longer than it normally will. And you'll have to give up more than you normally would. But it's the right time to do it because you don't want to wait till it's too late.
Great advice. Great advice. Shifting a little bit over to cybersecurity. Again, it's been a hot topic for quite a few years now, but resulting from the pandemic and having such a distributed workforce now, even with dealing with suppliers, et cetera, what are some of the additional threats that you have been identifying, and how have you been mitigating for those?
Yeah. So I don't know if everyone else out there gets tons of, the spam trying to get into your network, and they send these invoices, trying to get you to open them. So what we've done is we make sure that our IT team constantly, every month, sends out the advisor saying, everyone remember, do not click on these, do not respond if you don't know people. I've made it clear to everyone that if you get an email that you think is from me asking you to pay for something, don't believe it. That doesn't mean I don't want you to pay anything. It means if I send you an email to pay for something, it's not true. And if you think it could be, call me, text me, confirm with me verbally. Don't take things at face value. And then the other thing is, if you get something that is not legitimate, that it's spam, send it to IT so that they can start to ensure the filtering blocks what it needs to block. So I believe this is going to be a challenge, from here on out. You're always going to be one step behind, the hackers and the spammers, and we're going to have to figure out the phishers, and you're going to have to figure out ways to constantly make sure there's a good protocol for communication and security alert systems to protect your company.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and share my last question with you. And as you think of really the last probably 18 plus months, and truly you even came in a turnaround situation, and there have been quite a few challenges and quite a few areas where you've had to rise to meet that current challenge. But as you sit here in retrospect a little bit, and I know we're not through the current crises, but what is a learning and a takeaway that you take from this in terms of, what were the strengths of your organization coming into this, and what was the biggest learning through this process for your organization?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying, since I normally join turnarounds, so, one of the first things that I do is make sure that you have the right team in place. And at the end of the day, the way you win is with a good team that you trust, that have the same vision as you do, because that's the only way to be successful, and to over communicate. And so thankfully that part of the process was really underway. So we had a solid foundation of a team. we had to make tough decisions, and that's always hard because, you know, we had to get leaner to get ready for a downturn, for the what if, and to prepare the company for success. And the takeaway is to keep analyzing. Don't just take, you know, hey, I did my budget, it's set, we're good. You know, constantly figure out, are there ways to do things better? You know, what are the things that I can learn? Ensure that you reinforce open communication around the organization. And so that's been big, and be adaptable. You know, there are so many topics today that we have to talk about, and you know, people are going through a lot of fatigue right now. You know, working from home, not seeing people. You have a pandemic. You had protests. There's so many things that created some uncertainty for people. And you want to know that, let people know that it's safe to talk about what they're concerned with. And that it's okay to share your views on things and to help together solve those views. And so it's, as I said in the presentation, I believe we will be stronger from this. One of the things that I had to learn, so I'm one of those people, again, I'm a finance person, so that's what I am at heart, which means that I'm highly analytical, and I always resort back to data and information. And, you know, I'll tell you, the CEO of my last company, and he and I spent a lot of time together, and I would often get up and I would talk to the teams, and he's like, you know, you share data, but, you know, I need you to start to lead from the heart. and so I think one of the things, and maybe it's just me, maybe some of you out there feel this as well, you know, one of the challenges that we have is we've got to let people see who we are, not just what we're doing and what we're trying to accomplish. And even more so today, when you're working remote, to be able to let people see your human side and let people see more about who you are as a person is incredibly helpful. And I think it's something that long-term, using things like video chats where someone can see your expressions, not just hear your voice, especially if you're someone like me, who's incredibly monotone. So, you know, all of a sudden when they see it and they can see that you smile and laugh and get a little sense of your personality, it helps.
Great insight. You know, thank you, Gail, for this very insightful and very informative discussion.